Never date influencer girls or girls who flaunt themselves on Instagram like they're winning a prize. They post semi-nude photos and extremely suggestive and sensual content to entertain your weak and primitive mind. We live in an era where love has been transformed into content. A touch has become an emoji, attention has become currency, and intimacy has been replaced by performance. It's not inherently bad. It has simply been shaped by a machine larger than itself. One that you don't understand. The name of that machine is Instagram. But the damage goes far beyond the platform. What we are experiencing is the collapse of feminine energy in its purest form. A silent collapse, not immediately noticeable, but felt when you lie next to someone who is somewhere else, even if you are in the same room. Today, an ordinary woman receives more validation in a single post than a queen received in an entire banquet. But this validation doesn't come with love. It comes with dopamine. And dopamine has a cruel effect. The more effortlessly you receive it, the less capable you become of finding pleasure in what is simple, in what is human, in what is constant. And that's exactly what kills love, the constant search for novelty, for incessant stimulation, for one more click, one more story, one more "oh friend, did he send you flowers?" followed by "my ex used to do that too." Comparison annihilated the connection. You think you're in a relationship, but she's in an invisible competition, trying to prove to a digital world that she's desirable enough. The problem? This test never ends. It's an emotional treadmill. The more she runs, the less she gets anywhere. And the more she runs, the further away from you she gets. She looks at her phone as if it were a magic mirror. Each like is a confirmation. You are beautiful, you are desirable, you are winning. But what seems like a victory is actually a golden leash. The modern woman was taught to seek freedom and found a prison with a Valencia filter. While you think she's ignoring you out of coldness, what's happening is deeper. She's addicted. And not to another man, but to another reality. Just 3% of men ever unlock this, and once they do, their entire reality shifts. The Forbidden Manual reveals how to trigger desire in just 60 seconds. And when you get it, you'll instantly receive 3 secret ebooks, free. Tools to sharpen your mind, your control, and your power. Tap the link in the pinned comment. In the past, a woman's worth was measured by more solid attributes: family ties, social skills, emotional posture. Today, the algorithm defines her worth. Beauty is still currency, but now it's valued in real time. A sensual photo in a beauty cafe can yield more emotional reinforcement than weeks with a committed man. And that's what changes everything. Because it's not that she doesn't want love. It's that love has begun to compete with something much more addictive. The continuous validation of thousands of strangers, and her brain no longer knows how to differentiate that from a true connection. Psychology explains this phenomenon with a simple but devastating name: intermittent reinforcement. It's the same principle used by casinos and gambling apps. You never know exactly when you'll receive the next prize, and that keeps you hooked. In the case of Instagram, the prize is the like, the comment, the DM. This unpredictability triggers a dopamine release in the brain, and the woman gets used to it like someone needing a drink to feel alive. The consequence? A real, present, constant man becomes boring because he's predictable. And her brain, now conditioned, only gets excited by the unexpected. The problem is that this constant stimulation has a cost. It desensitizes. The same woman who cries watching a romance movie no longer feels anything when you compliment her. The same "good morning beautiful" that would have made a woman melt 15 years ago is now ignored, ridiculed, or received with an automatic emoji. And it's not her fault. It's just biology adapted to overexposure. The more dopamine she effortlessly receives, the less emotional capacity she has to connect with something that demands presence, exchange, and vulnerability. And here is the first shocking contradiction. While feminist discourses speak of freedom, independence, and empowerment, the behavior shaped by social media delivers the exact opposite. The modern woman is not free. She is a slave to an invisible audience. She needs to be seen, validated, praised, and above all, she needs to remain desirable. Because the moment she stops posting, she feels she disappears. And this destroys any possibility of truly loving someone. Because those who are desperate to be loved by everyone cannot love anyone deeply. This perverse dynamic can also be explained by social comparison, a concept formulated by Leon Festinger. He demonstrated that human beings tend to evaluate their worth based on comparisons with others. But while in the past, these comparisons were limited to the real social circle, friends from school, work, the street, today women compare their lives to celebrities, influencers, and models with access to procedures, filters, and pre-packaged emotional scripts. The result? Chronic dissatisfaction. A permanent feeling that something is missing, that their body isn't ideal, that their boyfriend isn't enough, that their life isn't aesthetic enough. And this dissatisfaction fuels the attention economy. A dissatisfied woman buys more, clicks more, engages more. It's a system that profits from female insecurity, and the more insecure she becomes, the more she needs to show off. Show her body, her lifestyle, her workout, her brunch, her bikini, her sunset. But what she doesn't show is the growing emptiness that consumes any chance of emotional depth. Because while everything seems beautiful on the outside, inside she feels increasingly distant from herself. This internal disconnection generates a dangerous phenomenon: emotional dissonance. She wants to be loved, but can't sustain the love when it arrives. She wants a relationship, but sabotages herself every time she starts to get attached. She wants someone who understands her, but can't bear to be seen in her true vulnerability. Because Instagram taught her that being desired is more important than being loved. And that has become the new code for the modern woman. Aesthetics have replaced essence. Performance has erased presence. Cleopatra, Aphrodite, Helen of Troy, female figures who shaped empires with their beauty. But there was something more to them: presence. They didn't compete with 1,000 other images at the same time. They knew how to use silence, scarcity, mystery. Today, women give themselves away in 1,000 pieces a day, in every story, in every close-up, in every exposure. And when you finally meet her in person, she is emotionally exhausted, without reserves, without presence. It's curious to note that the more free she seems, the more dependent she becomes. Dependent on the approval of others, on the self-esteem borrowed from her feed, and on the fabricated image she has built for herself. A freedom that compels her to always be smiling, always happy, always desirable, even when she is crying inside. It's no coincidence that rates of depression and anxiety among women have increased by 70% since the rise of social media. And this is not a coincidence, it's a consequence. But perhaps the cruelest point of all is this: women don't realize how far they have strayed from their own essence. Because she's surrounded by other women who are in the same prison. It's an emotional bubble where everyone seeks the same kind of validation, everyone displays the same kind of body, and everyone is exhausted but feigns fulfillment. And any woman who escapes this, who desires silence, depth, real connection, is seen as weak, as old-fashioned, as emotionally dependent. Freedom has become a silent dictatorship. And how does this affect you as a man? At the exact point where you try to connect and realize that the connection doesn't happen, you give your best but feel like you're competing with a screen. You offer stability, but she seeks emotional adrenaline. You want presence, and she wants performance. And that's when many men begin to feel inadequate. Not because they are bad, but because they are trying to love a woman who has been trained to avoid real connections. The most tragic thing is that, deep down, she misses that too. But she no longer knows how to return. Because love demands something that Instagram doesn't teach: vulnerability, silence, intimacy, presence without an audience. And all of this seems unbearable for someone who has become accustomed to being consumed in 15 seconds. It's like someone who has lived for years on an emotional roller coaster and suddenly is invited to walk hand in hand in a silent park. It seems beautiful, but boring, because the excitement no longer comes from the other person, it comes from the shop window. This modern woman lives a dilemma she herself doesn't understand. While seeking a relationship, she sabotages it, because she doesn't know how to love consistently. She has learned that she always needs to be selling herself, proving herself, exposing herself. And love doesn't combine with exposure. Love lives in private, in what is not said, in what doesn't need to be validated by an audience. Simone de Beauvoir wrote, "The modern woman has won the right to be everything except vulnerable." And it is this absence of vulnerability that has made so many of them incapable of loving, not out of malice, but out of adaptation. Instagram didn't just destroy romance, it destroyed the silence necessary for love to flourish, and she replaced that silence with visual noise, with competition disguised as empowerment, with emotional scarcity disguised as freedom. And here's the brutal truth. The woman you love may never have truly loved anyone. Because she never had time to learn. She grew up performing. She grew up being validated by strangers. She grew up believing that being desired was more important than being profound. She grew up exposed, she grew up confused, and now she's emotionally blind. And that's what scares you. Because you realize that what's missing in her isn't interest, it's soul. But before you judge her, understand, she didn't choose this. She was shaped by a system that taught her that love is weakness, and that real connection is a loss of power. But the price of that is loneliness. And no matter how many followers she has, when night falls and silence arrives, she feels the emptiness that no notification can fill. Modern women are experiencing a silent emotional collapse, not because they don't want to love, but because they no longer know how. Love demands commitment, but they've learned that commitment is dangerous. It demands presence, but they've been trained to perform. It demands consistency, but their brains are conditioned to seek novelty. And that's where the tragedy lies. They desire love, but are neurologically molded to destroy it. Attachment psychology accurately explains what's happening. John Bowlby, the father of attachment theory, showed that our childhood experiences with caregivers shape our ability to form bonds. And Mary Ainsworth expanded on this by demonstrating that there are types of attachment: secure, anxious, avoidant, and that these configurations accompany us into adulthood. The woman of the digital age, bombarded by superficial validations and ephemeral connections, tends to develop anxious or avoidant attachment. In other words, she desires connection, but is frightened when it approaches. This creates an emotional paradox. She longs for security, but confuses security with boredom. When you are kind, stable, committed, she doesn't understand how to interpret that. Because she's used to unstable emotions, to relationships that stimulate the limbic system, not the heart. That's why so many women say he's too good for me, and return to relationships that make them suffer. Emotional suffering has become the new barometer of interest. But this maladjustment isn't solely the fault of childhood or absent parents. The digital age has contributed to a new form of emotional collapse, affective burnout. An average woman today talks to more men in a week than her grandmother did in an entire year. And even if she doesn't end up with any of them, just the act of dealing with multiple interactions consumes psychic energy. The brain begins to dissociate, emotional sensitivity is diluted, and love, which should be a slow and profound construction, becomes just another stimulus among many. This excessive emotional stimulation also creates a devastating effect: the saturation of the soul. Have you ever heard someone say, "I'm emotionally exhausted"? Well, it's not just a metaphor. The prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for effective decision-making, enters a state of fatigue when exposed to an excess of contradictory stimuli. The result? It begins to shut down. It loses patience. It gets easily irritated, and it builds invisible walls that prevent it from being touched, even when it wants to be touched. And this is where a cruel, but increasingly common phenomenon comes in: digital narcissism. This isn't the evil personality from the movies. It's narcissism as a defense, as a way to survive a reality where women are expected to be everything: beautiful, sensual, independent, balanced, strong, fragile, active, available, mysterious. Faced with so many demands, she builds a bubble of self-protection. And in this bubble, she doesn't love. She manages expectations. She learns to moderate her presence to maintain interest, to feign enthusiasm so as not to appear disinterested, using vulnerability as bait, but never as a real surrender. Because every real surrender presupposes a risk. And she's already risked too much. She's already surrendered to those who didn't deserve it. She's already been discarded by those who promised to stay. She's already found herself crying on the floor for someone who only wanted one night. And in the midst of this emotional chaos, she learned the wrong lesson. Loving hurts more than it's worth. And then comes the greatest irony. She feels guilty for not being able to love. When she finds a good man, she feels strange, as if she were lying, because she doesn't feel what she should feel. But it's not a lack of feeling, it's numbness. Her emotional system is in defense mode, and no matter how much her heart wants to open, her body closes. The influence of this is visible in how they interpret gestures. When you send flowers, she thinks you're needy. When you show interest, she interprets it as desperation. When you're vulnerable, she feels secondhand embarrassment, not out of malice, but because her frame of reference has been distorted. She's learned that true love comes from tension, absence, and emotional games. That being emotionally constant is a sign of weakness, and that the bond is only exciting when it threatens to escape. This type of mentality creates a pattern of self-sabotage. And worse, a pattern that repeats itself, but that she doesn't see. The woman who is disappointed with all men is almost always the one unconsciously choosing the same unstable profiles. Not because she wants to suffer, but because her brain has been trained to confuse anxiety with passion. And this worsens when she finds you, the man who doesn't play games, who doesn't lie, who offers real presence. Her mind, addicted to emotional peaks, doesn't know what to do with it. It starts to distance itself, to make excuses, saying she needs space. But in reality, what she needs is to reprogram herself, to relearn how to love, to relearn how to receive, to relearn how to be present without needing to post, prove, or compare. Yes, there are conscious women who have been to therapy, who have read, who have worked on themselves. But they are the exception. Most were shaped by a reality that distorted their purest instincts, that taught them that being loved isn't enough. They need to be adored. That taught them that being loyal isn't worth as much as being desirable, and that traded emotional depth for the ability to generate envy in their friends. This emotional environment creates another perverse effect. Constant emotional substitution. You might be doing well, but a comment from an old crush can reactivate memories that cast doubt on everything. A friend's story with a more handsome boyfriend can make her question whether she's with the right man. And so, her love is always threatened by the illusion that something better might exist, even when the best is already there. The philosopher Simone Weil said, "True love is that which desires the good of the other, even when it implies loss for oneself." But this kind of love requires maturity, renunciation, and an emotional stability that few modern women have been trained to cultivate. What we have today is a superficial love, quick, beautiful, but disposable. Because everything that demands depth seems oppressive to those who live on the surface of their own self. And then the dilemma arises: how to love someone who can only show themselves, but cannot reveal themselves. How to build a connection with someone who is afraid of being seen without filters, without emotional makeup, without a script? The answer is simple. You don't love a character, and Instagram has turned almost everyone into a character. But the blame doesn't lie solely with social media. It lies with the entire system, with the absence of female role models who inspire depth, with the culture that rewards coldness as power, with the romanticization of eternal singleness, with the untreated collective trauma, and with the silence of men who, for fear of appearing fragile, have accepted living in relationships where they are merely extras in someone else's narrative. That's why you feel like you're always trying harder, that you give everything and receive half, that you're giving yourself to a woman who deep down no longer feels anything. Not because she doesn't want to, but because she can't anymore. She no longer knows how to love with her soul, because her soul is too busy trying to be perfect for an audience that doesn't even care. And yet, she still dreams of love. She still watches romantic comedies. She still cries to songs about surrender. She still writes texts on full moon nights saying that she just wants someone who treats her as a priority. But the next day, she goes back to her feed, to the games, to emotional coldness, because between the dream of love and the reality of performance won. And this is where you need to decide. Will you try to save someone who doesn't yet want to be saved? Will you adapt to a game that doesn't have a happy ending? Or will you become someone capable of distinguishing a whole woman from a woman in ruins, even if both are smiling? The good news is that there are still women capable of love. But you will only find them if you stop chasing those who only know how to show off. Because those who are always showing off are rarely ready to give themselves. And those who can't give themselves don't know how to love. What is happening to modern women is real. It's tragic, and it's reversible. But this will only happen when love becomes more important than image again. When presence is more valuable than likes. And when women stop competing for attention and start fighting for connection. Until then, most will remain incapable of love. And you will remain frustrated, confused, and emotionally exhausted. But if you understand what is happening, truly, you can protect yourself. And more than that, you can position yourself as someone who doesn't let themselves be affected, because their chaos can't become yours. And that's what we're going to talk about now. How strategic, conscious, and emotionally immune men are finding ways to love without losing themselves. Because yes, there is an alternative route, but few have the courage to take it. You don't need to save anyone. That's the first rule. The moment you try to heal an emotionally collapsed woman, you become a nurse for a trauma that isn't yours. And here's the brutal truth. No woman will love you because you were too understanding. The modern woman doesn't respect those who adapt to her chaos. She admires those who impose order. Not with aggression, but with emotional structure. Being immune isn't about being cold, it's about being clear. It's about having criteria. It's about looking at a beautiful, intense, attractive woman and still being able to say she's not ready for me. And moving on, without trying to prove her worth, without trying to be an exception. Because strategic men don't seduce with desperation. They attract with emotional scarcity. Emotional scarcity isn't the absence of affection. It's selectivity. It's the ability to say no to easy stimuli, to beautiful women who only know how to play games, to aesthetic relationships with an expiration date. The immune man isn't afraid of being alone. He prefers to be alone than involved with someone who drains him. Because he understands that his emotional energy is limited, and that wasting it on the wrong woman is a slow form of psychological suicide. Robert Greene, in The Art of Seduction, teaches that true power lies not in chasing, but in making the other person come to you. And for that, it's necessary to create a magnetic field. Not with muscles, money, or cliches, but with inner clarity. The magnetic man isn't the one who impresses. He's the one who commands silent respect, who doesn't succumb to emotional theatrics, who observes more than reacts, and who makes the woman wonder, why isn't he as enchanted as the others? That why is the beginning of true attraction. Because unlike passion based on anxiety, which dies in weeks, attraction based on respect grows over time. The problem is that most men want to be loved before being respected. They want connection before filtering. They want bonding before understanding who they're dealing with, and this turns them into emotional prey. The immune man reverses the logic. He tests before surrendering. He observes how she handles silence, how she deals with frustration, how she behaves when she's not the center of attention. Because a woman's true test isn't how she treats you when everything is going well, but how she acts when you set boundaries, when you say not today, when you disappear for 24 hours without warning, when you don't respond to provocation. That's when the act falls apart. But it's not about manipulation. It's about maintaining balance. Because when you give in too much, you lose respect. The strategic man isn't afraid of being misunderstood, because he prefers to be judged for being in control than to be loved for having let go. He understands the game, but he refuses to play on her terms. And here's an essential point: the emotional filter. Before getting involved, the immune man applies invisible tests. He observes if she has depth of listening skills, or only talks about herself, if she knows how to be silent, or fills every space with anxiety, if she seeks connection, or just distraction. And most importantly, whether she's interested in who he truly is, or just what he represents. This emotional filter saves lives, because a woman who is emotionally collapsed will show signs. She will avoid real vulnerability. She will use sarcasm to hide wounds. She will run away when you get too close. And if you don't know how to read that, you'll try to fix it. You'll join the dance. You'll fall into the cycle. Immune men don't dance with chaos. They observe, recognize, and retreat. Not with anger, but with lucidity. Because they know that a relationship isn't built solely on chemistry. It's built on emotional compatibility. And women with shattered emotions aren't compatible with conscious men until they heal, look at themselves, rebuild themselves. And how do you create real bonds in this scenario? With 3 pillars: clarity, emotional leadership, and constructive provocation. Clarity is knowing exactly what you want, not in terms of appearance or status, but in terms of energy, of emotional frequency. Do you want peace or intensity, depth or aesthetics, presence or performance? Most men don't know what they want, and therefore accept anything. Emotional leadership is the ability to maintain balance even when she loses hers. It's about not being reactive. It's about knowing how to guide the interaction towards what is healthy. It's about recognizing dysfunctional patterns and breaking them without drama. For example, if she starts testing you emotionally, you don't respond with irritation. You respond with neutrality. Because you're not in her space. You're above her. David Buss, one of the leading scholars in evolutionary psychology, shows that women historically seek men who offer emotional stability, resources, and decision-making ability. These attributes have now been replaced by followers, pretty phrases, and muscular bodies. But this hasn't changed the essence of what they seek when they want something real. A man with balance, with inner control, with selectivity. And here's the key: don't be the man who tries to compete with chaos. Be the man who offers an alternative, who shows through actions that another type of relationship exists, more silent, more real, more profound, and, at the same time, more demanding. Because the woman who enters your life will need to leave her emotional weapons outside. Yes, some will hate you for it. They'll call you cold, indifferent, arrogant. But others, the right ones, will feel relief. Because they too are tired of acting, of competing, of playing games. They just didn't know there was a place where they could be real and still be desired. This place is you. Or rather, it's what you represent when you refuse to be just another one. When you don't succumb to neediness. When you don't beg for affection. When you don't plead for attention. When you become immune to shallow seduction and only open yourself to what is visceral. It's not easy. It's lonely at first. But it's the only way to create bonds that survive the emotional apocalypse of the digital age. Because while most are trapped in relationships based on anxiety, strategic men are creating bonds based on truth, on calm, on depth. The woman who still knows how to love exists, but she doesn't reveal herself to just anyone. She observes, tests, waits, and only surrenders when she feels she has found a man who is above the game, who doesn't react, who doesn't perform, who simply is. And that, today, is the most powerful form of seduction. Do you want to create a real bond? Then be the kind of man who doesn't need to be loved to feel valuable, who doesn't get lost when ignored. He doesn't give up when he feels a little affection. Be the man she can't categorize because you're rare, and everything that's rare becomes irresistible.